to take this para-hydroxybenzamide. This is para-hydroxybenzamide. And then I've recrystallized it with this dicarboxylic acid. Now I already told you if you take a primary amide and an acid, I'm going to get that blue synthon. So that's what I've got. You've got another hydrogen bonding group, this phenolic OH. This is forming this hydrogen bond with itself, this pink synthon, like gamma hydroquinone. You remember I showed you that gamma hydroquinone with OH, 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 OH. So phenolic OH prefers to go with itself. It doesn't come and start hydrogen bonding with the acid and with the amide and doing all those. So the acid and amide does their story, the phenol does its story. But effectively, what I have been now able to do is that I have used insulation to get once again a binary crystal, a co-crystal. But now I have brought in a second reaction, supramolecular reaction. That is this OH-OH. What am I going to do next? Now look, we went back to some very early work which was done about 20 years ago. My group, where we identified actually at that time a totally new synthon, the iodo-nitro-synthon, using the halogen bond, which is a iodonium here, I+. So this appeared to be coming up in a number of structures. Now look at this, this is the crystal structure of para-iodo-nitrobenzene, and yet it is also the synthon is found in the 1-to-1 molecular complex of 1,4-dinitrobenzene and 1,4-diiodobenzene. So this is what this is another thing I'm saying. The one component and the two component crystals have the same crystal structure. So both of them essentially are linear things assembled with this synthon. It is just that the sense of the synthon is reversed in one case. So this iodo-nitro is another synthon which we have, you can call it like a reagent, supramolecular reagent. Now, so then what did we do? Go back to the amide. This red synthon is the amide dimer. Okay. This is the iodo-nitro dimer which, like the phenol, was insulated. So we've got two different kinds of synthons. Once again, this is a binary system. There is an amide with a diiodobenzene. Then there is an iodo-amide with dinitrobenzene. Both these got the same structure. Now you know what I'm going to do next. I take the amide which does this and then I put the dicarboxylic acid. So for the first time we are getting a 3-component crystal. Now what have I done? I have used the supramolecular homologation with acid, and I have used the insulation of the nitro group on the other side. Each thing does its own stuff. They don't start talking to each other. You don't want these functional groups to start talking with each other too much, because then your whole synthetic strategy will go wrong. So prior to this report, there was one report of a 3-component crystal by Professor Akeroy in the US. But that was a specific example for a specific system. Using strategies like this, my student of that time, Srinu, who is now a postdoc in NCL Pune, he was suddenly able to produce a large number, 20, 30 3-component crystals. So 3-component was considered to be very, very difficult or impossible. Nobody would think about something like that. But you can see by using now a logic-inspired methodology using synthons, you now have developed a general protocol for synthesis. Here I am using the word general in a very nice sense. Corey's article also in Pure and Applied Chemistry, he talks about general methods for the construction of complex molecules. That's the title of the paper, general. And general methods of synthesis are very, very important because they can be applied in a number of cases. So here is a general method for the synthesis of a ternary co-crystal. Now, yes, in 5 minutes I am just going to flash through 5 current issues. No explanations, not much anything, because each of these 5 issues one could easily give a 1-hour talk. But just to tell you now, up to here is a sort of an educational kind of a level which would, after telling you what the crystallization problem was, then I have told you use interactions a little bit more about hydrogen bonds, halogen bonds. Then I have told you the second part of crystallization, the design, how you do it for co-crystals. Now let's see, here I am not going to really spend any time, but more to give you a flavor of what's happening today. Synthon evolution. Now, look at this. This is the crystal structure of para-chlorophenol. So you can see the OH groups are in a tetramer pattern here in the crystal structure. Now here is 3,5-dichlorophenol. And look at the crystal structure here. There is some OH hydrogen bonding. It's looking a little more messy. There is these halogen bonds, OH, Cl and all you are getting. And this kind of a thing. So this is the synthon that produces in this crystal structure. Now when you look at the crystal structure of trichlorophenol, it has got an element of this para-chlorophenol. It has got the tetramer from here and it has got this extended synthon from this side. So it's almost as if this molecule trichlorophenol in solution, it seems to be just behaving like 4-chlorophenol here. It seems to be behaving like trichlorophenol in this side. So experiments, things like this are relatively rare, they are not common. But it sort of gives you a feeling for how synthons might evolve in solution. And this brings to another point that there may be great many synthons present in solution, but they are never realized or trapped in real crystal structures. So this is again sort of a, looks like a very cute example, but it also gives you a hint as to what might be happening. But I should assure you that such things are not very common and they require very close observation. My student Ariti of that time, you have to really look carefully to start seeing all these things. Prediction of hydration. This is an old work of mine in 91. Now this is a hydrogen bond and when any molecule has donors and acceptors for hydrogen bond formation. Now suppose the number of acceptors becomes very large in comparison to the number of donors. The best kinds of hydrogen bonds are formed when there is a single donor, single acceptor coming like that. They are strong, linear and all those. Suppose the number of acceptors becomes too much, the number of donors is very small. One of the ways it can address this system is to take up water, because water is the only simple common molecule which has more donors than acceptors. So as a result, by bringing in water into the crystal, the donor-acceptor imbalance, which I call it, is redressed slightly. And so this becomes a simple empirical way of figuring out, predicting whether a molecule is going to form a hydrate or not. This thing, by the way, is of great importance to the pharma companies, because they want to know, given a particular molecule, whether you get a hydrate or not, because then that means new forms, new solid forms with new properties, etc., etc., etc. So it actually happened in this case of this molecule, which is something which I had a chance to look at myself in a patent litigation case. The whole idea of this molecule dasatinib, which is actually named after a person, probably from Bengal. He was, I think, working in one of these big American pharma companies, and I think he's one of the people who had made a contribution towards synthesizing this molecule. And this dasatinib is a molecule that is used in the terminal stages of ovarian cancer. So it's a, almost last stage medication for cancer. And people were making hydrates of this stuff. And the question that came in the patent, in the case, was that is obtaining a hydrate obvious or not? Because if obtaining a hydrate is obvious, then it doesn't qualify, the hydrate doesn't qualify for patent protection over and above the anhydrated form. And so people look at my paper and say, oh, look at Desiraju's 91 paper, count the donors and acceptors, and anybody can tell you that dasatinib will form a hydrate. And that's exactly what the generic company was arguing, saying that, the innovator company was arguing. Because they were saying this generic has made the hydrate There's nothing really so unobvious about getting a high grade. Anybody would know that you will get a high grade from a molecule like this. So you can see crystal structure prediction can have great many implications in all sorts of different areas and quite quickly also. So this tells you the beauty of how far it can go. I told you 3 component was difficult. From 2 to 3 itself was very difficult. But you know, when you have good students and the atmosphere and all is correct, we found that from 3 to 4 going there also took us just about 2.5 years. And we were very happy with 4 because nobody in the world has seen 4. Very recently, I think some of you have seen our particular paper in JSES when we have published a number of compounds which have 6 components in the same crystal. So how we got to the 6 and all, I really need a whole hour to tell you the logic of how we went from 3 to 4, and 5 and 6 are essentially the same story. So from 4 you can go to either 5 or 6. But you see, now you are turning the thing on its head. Because now to get 6 different molecules all coming into one crystal, it's just like a, molecular acrobatics. And that's exactly what we are doing. I hope the cartoon will give you some sort of an idea. You can see this is your 1, 2, 3, 4. So out of this 4, you see this color is green, blue, grey, yellow. So in the 6, what happens is the yellow, grey and blue sides are unaffected, but the substitution happens in the green side, as is seen in this particular flow chart. So that you've got to up to ABCD where everything is stoichiometric. D and D will substitutionally form a solid solution type thing in one side, and when you put F also, D, E, F, all 3 come. So you see, now we can go up to 6. So the question is, what is the limit? How many molecules can we go on putting in these crystals? Twistable crystal, this is again something recent that has come out in my lab. This is a whole wonderful area of crystal engineering where you can engineer mechanical properties. So if you have a balance of interactions which is of a certain type, you get crystals that are plastic. So plastic means you bend it and then it doesn't go back. Now if you have a different balance of interactions, it's elastic. When you bend it, it jumps back. Most crystals of course are neither plastic nor elastic, they are just brittle. So if you take a crystal and then do all these tricks, it will just break. So what makes a crystal plastic? What makes it elastic? And so we finally got this. Shubhankar, my student, he got this twisting crystal. And so basically this is a kind of 2-dimensional plasticity which you can engineer in a crystal based on micromanaging those interactions. And then here of course on the other side, I had so much nice food of Bengali type in the last 2 days. So this is something from our part of the country. I don't know how many of you all have eaten this, but one of the most delicious savory is called buruku, and it is very, very difficult to make. It is something that nobody will try to dare to make in the house. And somehow that what we call that batter, what you call maav, has to be of a particular type and made in a particular way. Otherwise, if you put this wretched thing in oil, the whole thing will become bundi. That's all. It will not get buruku at all. So what is it that it's a kind of a nanochemistry there, what you are doing in that batter for it to have this 2D plasticity. Essentially what Shubhankar did is he tried to engineer those things using interaction, and of course he got it very well indeed. Combinatorial library of synthons. This is another student of mine, Ritesh. I told you lots of synthons exist in solution, and the question is there's another way of making multi-component crystals. The earlier methods I have told you are smart methods of making a crystal. This is a smart selection of a large number of crystals which are potentially hanging around in solution. So out of a large number of synthons, how do you pull out something? This is like the combinatorial dynamic library of Jeremy Sanders and things like that. So this is how you can pull out certain situations and get co-crystals that you want. You can routinely get up to quaternary, 4-component crystals using Ritesh's method. He is now a postdoc in Fujita's lab in Tokyo. After doing PhD with me, he went over there. Crystal nucleus. This of course is work that was done by Rahul Banerjee, who is now of course in IISER, Calcutta, and a pretty famous researcher in his own right. But this is something he did when he was a PhD student. A model for a crystal nucleus. The last thing I told you in that molecular supramolecular analogy is that crystal nucleus is equal to transition state. Just like nobody can ever see a transition state, nobody will ever be able to see a crystal nucleus. But there are some crystal structures which resemble seemingly a crystal nucleus. Now here's a very funny one, which we got purely by accident. Nobody can use crystal engineering to get something like this. A part of the crystal, this is sodium saccharin hydrate, looks ordered, and a part of the crystal looks disordered, and it's got a hell of a lot of water in this crystal. So by using various analysis, we showed that it is reasonably close to what you may call a crystal nucleus. And this, again, another paper that attracted a wide amount of attention when it was published. So, I mean, coming back to Shantiniketan, it's been a real, humbling experience actually to be here. And of course, in the chaya of the great Gurudev, who has set up this place, very special university, a very special type. And the Vice Chancellor also mentioned some comments. The spirit permeates in this particular atmosphere. I'm very glad I came. First time I'm coming here. And I think the real challenge, as I was telling some of you this morning, we had a beautiful walk in the campus early morning to see all the things going on here. Today, I mean, and as I was talking to the department people also, this university was set up with a very special purpose, a very special place. It's an alternative thought method. And you all have done very well in the chemistry department, and you all have, come up to the level of publishing standard papers in standard journals. I think that the biggest test of Vishwabharati and Shantiniketan in particular is now that using a method of thinking and a method of teaching and a method of learning that is so very different from the conventional method, the results of this method should then be extraordinarily better than elsewhere. So the competition now should be really, if we are to prove Gurudev right, I think what should happen in a place like this is that you should be able to show that using the whole philosophy of education which is present in this place is not just good enough to be like any other central university. It will have to be something that is very, very special. And I think this is a real challenge for teachers and students in a place like this. It's got to make a difference, because otherwise if it's going to make no difference, then we can write it off and say it is just like a fad. Because today there is this harsh world outside the campus walls. And we've really got to be able to show that something like this will produce a qualitatively better result than using the other methods. Because in the end, I have seen in many places, I have travelled pretty much all over the world. Everybody does the same chemistry. The same second law is valid throughout the world, as we know. It better be. But the approach to solving the problem, J.M. Lane once told me about my Synthon method. He said, you're talking more about molecular sociology. And he said, I can easily understand how a Hindu got into this way of thinking much faster than somebody else. And there's a great deal of wisdom to his statement. And which means that, when I've traveled everywhere, the Americans are best at being Americans, Germans are best at being Germans, Indians are best at being Indians. So we must somehow synergize our Indian way of thinking to be able to solving the most advanced scientific problem, using the full rigor and the full rubric that is demanded in science. Not mumbo jumbo, please don't get me wrong. But one has to be able to prove or disprove that our way of thinking as Indians is a better way. And I think that, ladies and gentlemen, that's the real challenge before all of you in this place. That's the impression that I'm going away with. And of course it is Very, very great pleasure for me to be here. I would of course like to thank my students and postdocs over the last 40 years with whom I have worked to give you some of these things, and I am greatly privileged also to be able to speak in front of you this morning, and I wish the rest of this symposium a great success. Thank you very much all.